Well, any moment now, members of the House of Representatives are expected to hold a second round of voting for the next speaker. Ohio Republican Congressman Jim Jordan fell short of the votes needed to secure the gavel yesterday. Jordan received 200 votes. He needs to flip at least 17 more GOP members in order to win the speakership. Joining us now is CBS News congressional correspondent Nikole Killion. Has been on this beat for a while now. Not much has changed. What are you hearing from lawmakers about the vote, Nikole?
Well, Anne-Marie, as you know, we talked to Jim Jordan pretty extensively this morning as he was shuttling between members' offices. He had some members coming to his office. He's been here at the Capitol meeting with GOP leaders. Sorry, that looked like it was the Republican whip, Tom Emmer, who we know that Jim Jordan also was in his office today. Obviously, a key player is someone who rounds up votes. But look, at this point, Jim Jordan has made clear that he does not intend to drop out of this race in any way, that he is going to ride this out as best he can, although some members have expressed skepticism, even suggesting that he may be losing votes. But again, we will see as this vote plays out in the next hour.
I saw someone yesterday, Nikole, may have been Ken Buck, Representative Ken Buck, suggesting that although Jordan may whip some votes up today from people who voted against him yesterday, that there will still be others who may have voted for him yesterday that won't vote for him today. In other words, he's still going to fall 20 votes shy of what he needs. What are you hearing about that?
Yeah, well, I think, we should, again, kind of see how the vote plays out. Obviously, Ken Buck is one of those members who has been on the fence. His primary concerns with Jim Jordan are specifically his positions about the 2020 election and January 6th. And he has had conversations with Jim Jordan about that. He believes that Jordan should acknowledge that former President Trump lost the 2020 election. He said that he wasn't necessarily able to get those types of assurances from Jordan. Jordan, to his part, has said that his position on 2020 has been clear. But that being said, a lot of members have a lot of different concerns when it comes to Jim Jordan. Some of it is policy differences. Some of it is just, they feel strong-armed. Others just don't like the way that this whole process has gone down, where Kevin McCarthy was ousted. Then you have Steve Scalise as the next designated candidate elected by members of the conference, only to withdraw. Some feel he was forced out. So there are still a lot of issues that have to be resolved if Jordan is going to shore up support in the way that he would like.
Do we have an over-under on the number of rounds of voting before, somebody else raises their hand? Does it have to be at least 15? Do you have to go as long as McCarthy went?
Yeah. Somebody said that they might go to 15.
As I've been telling people, I'm not making bets. I'm not placing bets. One member joked around that, she thinks that it may take at least 5 rounds, whatever it took Pope Francis, anywhere from that to, the 15 that it took for former Speaker Kevin McCarthy. But look, at the end of the day, I think the main dynamic to watch is that there is some growing momentum for potentially expanding or extending the power of interim Speaker Patrick McHenry. That is an idea that is growing. There's already a resolution that Congressman Mike Kelly has put out there. We have also learned that Congressman David Joyce, who's a moderate, heads the Republican governance group, that he may attempt today to file a motion to try to elect McHenry on a more permanent basis until they can find a new leader. And even some Democrats are starting to crack the door open to that possibility as well. So if Jordan isn't able to muster up the vote in these next couple of rounds, then that could be the next trigger that could be pulled by other members.
Nikole, you've covered Congress for a number of years now. Maybe you can explain to our audience sort of the dynamic that we're seeing. I mean, I note that Trey Gowdy, a former member of Congress, has essentially described what we're seeing right now, specifically as it relates to the strong arm tactics that Jim Jordan supporters have reportedly been using while lobbying on his behalf. He says, and I'm going to quote him here, they're trying couples counseling for people who want to kill each other. I can't overstate how angry some Republican members are with Jordan supporters, not Jim Jordan, but his supporters. And then you've got Mitt Romney, who I think was very sort of telling in an interview that he gave to Norah O'Donnell, the anchor and managing editor of CBS Evening News, where he talks about Jim Jordan wouldn't be his first choice if he were in the Congress. Obviously, he's a senator. But he does say that the great majority, I'm quoting him here, great majority of the Republicans in the House, I think, would like to have someone that represents the mainstream of our party. Jim Jordan represents a small part of the party, but a very vocal part, and they've been calling the shots. So just explain to our viewers that dynamic. I mean, you don't really see that on the other side of the aisle, right? Once they're behind their speaker, they may have differences and they may have disagreements, but oftentimes when it came to Nancy Pelosi, they were united. Why aren't we seeing that with the Republican Party?
Sorry, I just was trying to get Patrick McHenry since we were just talking about that point.
Yeah, you were mentioning that.
Look, I mean, as I said, he kind of is the man to watch protectively if this doesn't go Jordan's way. He's kind of been tight-lipped as to whether or not he wants the job, suggesting he probably doesn't, that he just kind of sees himself as a placeholder. But again, those dynamics could change if Jordan ultimately... Sorry, I thought maybe we were getting someone else coming down the hallway here. But that is certainly, something that we'll have to watch going forward. To answer your question about the dynamics, look, I mean, I think a couple of things. Obviously, this country as a whole has become more divided and more polarized. So that is reflected not only in the electorate, but in who gets elected. And I think to a certain extent, that's some of what you are seeing play out in Congress. Have there been efforts to try to remove a speaker before? Yes. Has it gotten to this level? No, because we know Kevin McCarthy's ouster was unprecedented. First time something like that has happened in history. But just keep in mind, maybe circa 2015, there were efforts to try to push then Speaker John Boehner out. He ultimately made the call to step down, but some of that effort was led by then Congressman and House Freedom Chair Jim Jordan. So, this is something that has been kind of bubbling up over the years. And of course, when you have situations like January 6th, where you have all these rioters and descending on the Capitol, people getting killed as a result of this. Those kind of dynamics, I think, do kind of harden people's position. We, just in talking to a lot of Democrats and Republicans over the years, that certainly was a dividing factor for a lot of members. And you saw a number of members who retired because they just simply feel like the dynamic up here has changed so much, where people are so entrenched in their positions or so concerned about what cable network they're going to be on or what tweet they're going to put out next, that, they really are talking past each other instead of to one another as things used to be. So I think some of that is reflected in some of the tension that you are seeing up here right now. And not to mention, again, just the raw emotions from, what happened with respect to McCarthy. I mean, I would almost suggest it is kind of a political trauma that was experienced in the House, and we're still feeling those repercussions of that. There are just a lot of members who are just mortified by what happened. And even if they didn't think Kevin McCarthy was the best guy, they felt like he did have the majority of the conference behind him. And I don't know if people's positions can ever be reconciled with that. There's still a lot of anger at those 8 members who went along with the motion to vacate. There's a lot of mistrust now with Democrats because Democrats went along with it. So now that Democrats are, calling for these bipartisan talks to try to find a consensus candidate, and they want to work on this bipartisan path, Republicans don't necessarily want any part of it, since they feel like, their speaker got thrown under the bus and booted for it. So there's a lot of trust issues, and that doesn't really help matters as we try to navigate through this process.
It is fascinating, Nikole, your breakdown and analysis there, because, again, just comparing and contrasting, we don't have dogs in the fight. We're just sort of looking at the information and the facts. When Nancy Pelosi was Speaker, she rarely, if ever, Nikole, correct me if I'm wrong, ever brought a vote to the floor if she wasn't sure that she had the votes. And what you're seeing here is you and others, even Republicans, saying, well, I don't know how this is going to turn out, which I think is just remarkable. And again, sort of speaks to how Nancy Pelosi was able to pass such consequential legislation during her tenure as Speaker of the House of Representatives. Nikole, Great analysis, great reporting. We appreciate you as always. Thank you.
You bet.